Welcome to this edition of Safety First. I'm your host, Tim Kelly, joined today by the Fire Marshal for the City of Suffolk, Lieutenant Chuck Chapin. Thanks for being with us, sir.
Certainly, thank you.
Talking about National Arson Awareness Week, which is coming up in early May. I think it's the 7th through the 13th. And every year when we talk about Arson Week, there's always a theme. I mean, again, everyone wants to think about arson and the impacts it certainly can have on our lives and being preventative measures and things. But this year, houses of worship. And you think, well, wait a minute. But then if you think, wait a minute, you think nationally, more so luckily than in Suffolk, there have been instances where these have occurred. And I think statistically about 103 arsons in houses of worship per year nationally. We're not talking about in Suffolk. We've been blessed in that respect. But that's the theme for this year. And when we talk about that, what comes to mind to you as far as religious organizations and sites, as far as some of the factors that perhaps jump out to why people maybe target those type of places?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us
Sure.
and allowing us to get this message out.
Yes.
When we talk about arson in places of worship, statistically, everything is shown that a lot of times the arson is used to cover up some other type of a crime that has occurred. Most of the time with your house of worships, they're not occupied 24/7 as a bank or, the banks aren't, that's why they're targeted at night.
Right, right.
So your houses of worship are normally targeted in the evening, overnight hours. They tend to feel that they're easy points of access.
Right.
And, most churches now, they have a large office area, especially most of your bigger churches.
Yes.
So financially, monetarily, there may be, a safe with items other than just monetary.
Right.
So they tend to want to pry on those things after hours, and a lot of it comes back to the prevention side of it from the organization taking those steps to ensure that their areas of worship
Yes.
are safely covered.
Correct. And of course, when you talk about that, there are things that kind of don't, when we talk about protection or preventative measures, it doesn't really just apply to a house of worship. It can apply to your own home, your own business, or whatever. But we're talking about internal and external prevention measures. And one big thing, I guess would be kind of clearing any debris. I mean, you don't give someone that perhaps is seeking to do something like this the means by which to do it. I think that's a good first step. But I mean, that would be inside or out, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's just like at your home.
Right.
You want to make sure that your bushes aren't overgrown. You want to make sure that your lighting is sufficient. There's no dark spots when you come home in the after hours that someone could be hiding in the bushes. So illuminating those areas.
Right.
And that also goes for the interior. Leaving your house dark at all times, is just an open invitation for someone to come in and do something wrong.
That's right.
And that's where a lot of the houses of worship, you're seeing more to where they have exterior lighting.
Right.
They have interior lighting that's on in certain areas. There's motion sensors on the lights.
Right.
So if someone makes that foot traffic through there, it may deter that person from wanting to move in closer.
Right. And I think you talked about the fact that these facilities in a lot of instances are not used 24/7, and in some instances they're isolated out. And there isn't maybe not a church office there. It certainly is open when they have Sunday service or Wednesday evening service, or if they have something going on with a youth group or something for seniors and things like that. And there's a ebb and flow there, but it's the fact that they're sometimes isolated or not. There's not maybe a groundskeeper there 24/7, so that creates a situation unattended, like you talked about. I guess I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm thinking most arsons probably don't happen when a bunch of people are hanging out right in the facility at the time, right?
Not normally.
Yeah.
No, they would be after hours.
Correct.
Normally when it's vacated.
Sure.
And there's no one in there. Some of the things that could help with that, is making sure that the church or the synagogue, wherever the place is, that they have working smoke detectors.
Correct.
No different than at home.
Right.
You want to make
Right.
sure that, that we have working smoke detectors in your places of worship, places of business. Those smoke detectors are that early warning to notify the occupants that something's not right.
Correct.
And they need to evacuate.
Right.
So having those smoke detectors. The other thing are sprinkler systems.
Yes.
Most of your newer churches, if they meet the criteria within the building code, they have to be sprinklered if their occupancy is above a certain number. So that again is that early detection, the early notification, and hopefully that sprinkler system, if it was activated, would allow for those people to exit in a timely manner, and then the sprinkler system would keep the fire in check until the fire department got there.
Now, through the fire marshal's office, do you, I don't know if this is you do or you don't, are y'all required to do annual inspections of sprinkler systems, or how does that work? Or is that done through a private thing that they have to report back, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's all done by third-party inspection.
All
So
right.
your sprinkler companies, they'll come in and they'll do their yearly tests on the systems. Some businesses have it set up to 6 months. Some do weekly,
Okay.
some do monthly.
All right.
And then normally what happens is they forward us the inspection forms. We add it to the file within the occupancy, so we can keep track of when those systems were tested.
And I think another thing that houses of worship need to think about, certainly the preventative measures inside out that we talked about, but also, you know, you hear about community watch groups, but also arson watch groups. I mean, in the event that, especially if it's an isolated facility, there generally is either vehicular traffic, or if you're in a neighborhood like a lot of our churches are, especially around City Hall, they're in areas where there's a dense population. So there's people that are around that maybe just need to be coordinate with them, the neighbors, work with your neighbors to be a little more observant to kind of help out with that in the event that something were to creep up.
And that's one of the things that, one of the initiatives that they talk about
Yes.
this year with the places of worship
Yes.
is starting a community worship group. You know, no different than your community watch at home.
Right.
Again, having those neighbors keep track, and today's buzzword is, you know, see something, say something.
Correct.
That's so true, especially in today's society. You know, that one person may have seen something that ultimately is going to make or break a case.
Right.
And they don't want to come forward because they don't want to get involved or whatever the case is. But, you know, I would beg and plead to that person, please don't withhold any information if it came to
Yes.
that something happened. Back in 2005, we did have a fire here in the city of Suffolk in a church, and it ultimately, the arson was a direct result of trying to clean up
Right.
a botched burglary.
Yes.
So they set the fire to make it look like nothing else had gone on.
Correct.
So that did take a church out of service for a while. Anytime that a church fire is involved, most of the federal agencies come in. ATF they come in and partner with us and work with us to determine any church fires, you know, what potentially happened.
Yes.
And that was a long drawn out investigation that subsequently led to an arrest.
Right.
And, you know, the church was able to be reoccupied. The damage wasn't to the point where the church had to be rebuilt.
Correct.
But if someone wants to get into these places, they're going to get into them. And that's, you know, the sad part. You can lock all the doors, lock all the windows,
Yes.
have everything where you think it's secure.
Right.
But if someone ultimately wants to get in there, they're going to get in there.
And you know, I mentioned off the top, I mean, there's over 100 per year nationally, and you think, okay, well, that can't happen here. Well, it did, and you give a perfect example right there. It wasn't that long ago, and thankfully, we have not had any other instances like that. But I mean, as you noted, these facilities are unmanned or are not open, especially in the evenings. So again, it creates situations where something could possibly happen, hopefully not, of course. But that's where vigilance on you and your staff, and certainly the church community and the community at large as well, to kind of keep an eye on things. And like you said, see something, say something. It's as simple as that. It's a very simple step to take to help be a good neighbor. And you know, if you have a fire at one facility and it's in a densely populated area, it could theoretically spread to another one depending upon circumstances. But thankfully, Suffolk Fire and Rescue response times are so well that, again, we would hope to control that as best that we can. But every situation is different. You don't know what, I guess, was used to start the fire, and again, conditions as they would be in that circumstance. But so it's a credit to the men and women of the Fire and Rescue Department for their fine work that they continue to do in our community. But you know, in addition to houses of worship, we talk about arson awareness. Anything else you can think of? And I know we've talked about this in past years. The theme kind of changes from year to year. But again, it's trying to prevent, be aware of, and think about ways to prevent arson in your individual environment, or be it your house of worship, your house, your business, or anything, correct?
Yeah, vehicles.
Yeah.
Someone else's personal property.
Right.
You know, if there's a lot of bad people out there that want to do bad things to people.
Right.
And unfortunately, you know, we see arson as a crime. And we've started to see more of an uptick as far as some of the arson stuff, you know, going out and carelessly setting brush and grass fires.
Right.
And that's arson.
Yes.
It's not, you know, carelessly. No, you went out there and did
Right.
that. You
Right.
know, that's arson.
Right.
And a lot of people don't grasp that when, you know, well, I didn't really mean for that to happen.
Right.
I was just playing with, you know, to see what it would do.
Right.
that's arson.
Yes.
And whether it's a grass fire, whether it's a house, whether it's a vehicle, you know, all these things, if you do the crime, you're going to pay the time. And that's where it takes a lot out of our office, doing an investigation on an arson and utilizing those witnesses, those neighbors, those neighborhood watch groups. So it's really important that everyone works together when it comes to a situation like this. Luckily, knock on wood, we don't have that many incidents here within the city of Suffolk.
Yes.
However, when we do, we have a very high success rate with prosecution. So that's arson is a very hard thing to prove, and we've done a very good job of the conviction and the sentencing.
And I think that's where the training for you and your staff come into play, with knowing to evaluate every situation, figure out again the root cause, and then work back from there to do what you do to keep us all safe, and again to prosecute those who have done something like that. I did have a question. You said, you know, people might tell, well, I didn't mean to do that. Well, if you have a situation and someone's driving down the road, and again, you're not supposed to do this, but they take a lit cigarette and throw it out the window, and of course, you know, we have dry conditions and you have brush or undergrowth or whatever that's there, and it starts a fire. And it spreads, as we tend to have brush fires and things in our community due to the vastness of Suffolk. Is that considered an arson, or could it be? How does that work?
If the intent was that I threw that cigarette out there and I wanted that stuff to burn,
got it.
That's arson.
Okay.
If you were driving along and just took the cigarette and tossed it out the window,
Yes.
that unfortunately is considered an accidental fire.
Okay.
And it would be chalked up to carelessly discarded smoking material.
Understand.
A lot of times, you know, that's what we see, you know, they're not intentionally throwing that cigarette butt out to start that fire.
Right.
So that's where, you know, a lot of our brush fires alongside the roadside and things of that nature are attributed back to carelessly discarded smoking material.
And again, I mean, certainly they don't intend it, but it's what happened, and there is still some liability on the person's response. If a brush fire turns into and gets to a home or destroys crops or anything like that, correct? There is
a statute in the code for carelessly damaging standing grains and so on.
Yes.
And you can be charged with that if it was a direct, you know, it didn't go out and subsequently other things happen.
Correct.
So, and the other token with that is, you know, we're getting to the end of the burn ban time.
That's right.
May 1st, the summer burn ban will go into effect, so there's no outside burning, with the exception of your recreational fires, 2x3, you know, wood, strictly wood, not pallets, not, you know, household items, household trash.
Don't get creative.
Exactly. You know, campfires, and then your manufactured chimeneas and things that you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot. Those are allowed by the code. Okay. It's exempt during the summer burn ban. So you still can have your, you know, your fires. Just take into account, you know, that you've got some type of an extinguishing source somewhere nearby. Someone's with the fire at all times. But come May 1st, the open burning, you know, the large open burning will cease.
Okay.
So.
Now, again, when you talk about the open burn permit or the permits, when they have, they need to coordinate that through your office, correct? Right.
Yeah, they can either go to the website or they can call 514-4550 and let the ladies know that they want to apply for a burn permit. Right. And what we'll do is we'll take their information down, we'll verify their address, and you have to meet the criteria within the ordinance, which is you've got to be 300 feet from any occupied structures on adjacent properties, 50 feet from any occupied structures on your properties, and then from there, you know, we'll look at whether or not we'll issue a permit for a large, normally we do 5x5 piles, is what you'll see out in the rural areas.
Got it.
And a lot of times people call that live in neighborhoods. Right. And when you explain the ordinance and the distances, you know, well, I've been doing this my whole life, I've lived here, and now you're telling me I can't burn. But if you're utilizing it as that recreational fire, and you're burning just sticks, that's within the intent of the code, provided that you know, have that person staying with it. It's not, you know, so you're allowed to do that.
Got it.
Where it comes into neighborly disputes, the smoke starts going to the neighbor's house. If we come out there, we're going to ask you to stop. Right. And then at that point, you know, if we come back again, then we'll issue a summons.
Now, in the event that you're in a neighborhood and you have a situation like you talked about, and it's not you doing it, it's maybe a neighbor or someone that you see, or you know, you're out and about in Suffolk and you see something, you think, well, wait a minute, what you just described, that's not what I'm seeing. Who should they be calling in those instances to report that? Should they be calling non-emergency dispatch, or
if it's
what do you think?
a small fire
Yes.
and it's not threatening any structures, it's not in your mind you feel that it's not a true emergency.
Correct.
The non-emergency number for dispatch would
Okay.
be perfectly fine with that.
Yep.
If it's threatening a structure, if it's a vehicle, you know, things are nearby where the fire's spreading or the wind's taking
Right.
it, then obviously, you know, call 911
Got it.
and make that. Again, that early notification is the key
Mm-hmm.
in all of emergency stuff that we do, whether
Right.
it's a heart attack,
Yes.
a fire, car accident, any of that stuff, that early notification, the sooner we're notified, the sooner we can get on the road, the sooner we can get there, the
Right.
sooner we can mitigate
Right.
and, you know, hopefully take care of the situation before it gets too significant.
I understand. Again, National Arson Awareness Week coming up May 7th through the 13th. Suffolk Fire and Rescue and the Fire Marshal's Office are here to provide information, help you if you have a question. So again, if you're with a house of worship, whether management or an attendee, and you have a question, I guess contact your office. They could do
Absolutely.
that. Certainly if there's any questions about ways to make your facility more secure, they could also do that as well. So again, a great resource here in the city of Suffolk to tap into. What was it, 514-4550?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, so that's the number. We'll have that on the screen. If you have any questions, contact them, and they'll hopefully provide some answers and give you some guidance in those ways to make sure that you're as safe as possible. Again, wanting to prevent those arson situations from happening. Better to do it always beforehand, get ahead of the curve, make sure you have a safe facility and everything is taken care of. Again, that incident and the type of issue would never affect you, your house of worship, your home, your place of business, whatever the case would be, whether it's National Arson Awareness Week or not. Correct?
Correct. Fire safety
Yes.
is a year-long, 365
Right.
days a year, 24 hours a day. Everybody's responsible for fire safety. And that ultimately is what it comes down to.
Yes.
Again, make sure you got working smoke detectors in your home. Can't stress that enough. Check on your neighbors. Make sure your neighbors' smoke detectors are working. And again, when we change the clocks, we recommend that you change the batteries in the smoke detectors.
Simple procedures. We know it, we hear it as children, but again, continue to follow it throughout adult life. And I know that y'all do a lot of education within schools as well, because if you get them young, they can bring that information home. So again, Fire Marshal's Office out there doing their part to keep you and everyone in the city of Suffolk safe. So Lieutenant Chapin, thanks for your time today.
Certainly. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. That would do it for this edition of Safety First. I'm your host, Tim Kelly. We'll see you next time.